David. I'm just doing the London recap for today. So on AU on the daily, we'd been pausing in this sort of demand for the last few days, but we hadn't really gone anywhere. We were just sort of ranging from side to side, basically just building liquidity. But following FMC last night, we sort of had this strong bullish momentum to the upside. So I'd say at this point, it's quite likely that we could see a pullback up to sort of the EQ of the leg, maybe to mitigate this supply or something even higher up. So yeah, longs definitely make sense overall, sort of to play the daily pullback. Yeah, and then obviously target the next leg to the downside from one of the supply zones in the premium. On the 4 hour, obviously we had this huge move last night following FOMC. We'd come into this 4 hour flip zone. So at this point, when we had this sort of sweep of the high, I was thinking this morning that even though I'm anticipating the daily pullback, I was thinking that we might get a sort of bearish pullback on the 4 hour to sort of fill up more orders in this demand. So sells definitely did make sense from that regard on the M15 if the setup, but overall I will be anticipating maybe price just pulling back into this demand, filling up more orders, and then sort of continuing up into the premium of the leg. But M15 then, I sort of this morning when I came to my desk, around here. So I personally counted this here as structure, even though it was only 27 pips. It's just it looked significant enough to me, and I thought that if this low went, that it would be likely that we would sort of get the more complex pullback, and it just sort of made sense overall. This demand obviously caused this boss, so it did make sense maybe be looking for longs in there, but at this point it had already been mitigated there and here as well. So I was thinking maybe as well, given the fact we had mitigated the 4 hour supply thing, we might pull back to 4 hour demand. I was thinking that it was possible to be looking for sells, and you can see eventually we got the break of structure. So following this here, this sort of buy to sell wick is basically what caused the boss, and then you could say it flipped this demand as well. So this was definitely a high probability supply for me to be looking for sales from. And then you can see we sort of pull back into it here on the M1, placed an order but it just wasn't tagged. You can see we pulled back into this was the M15 supply. So we mitigated the supply, we liquidated these sort of equal highs. So you have the mitigation, liquidation, then we had the V-shaped recovery, like you can see 3 strong bearish candles, chalk, and then there was no real flip, so enter on the extreme. I used a 2.5 pip stop there just because I try to use a fixed 2 pip stop, but if it doesn't cover the EQ of the zone, then I'll go up sort of towards 3 pips if necessary, just because it doesn't really make sense to me to only be sort of taking the top quarter of the POI. But anyway, it wasn't tagged, and then sort of rocketed to the downside. Then following that there was this sort of M1 POI. You could have left a limit order there, but personally when price has to come back up that much, I'm just more comfortable leaving or placing a confirmation entry if it sets up. So see, we pulled back into it and then mitigated this, swept that sort of high there, V-shaped recovery, chalk. So then 2 pip stop, sort of just slightly below the EQ, but again no tag. And then sort of when we took this low, it was at that point I sort of took off the order, sort of thinking that if price came back up I would consider a confirmation entry. But then sort of there was a potential confirmation entry here, but it was right at the end of the session and it's just a wick break and there's no real clear sweep, so I was happy enough to sort of leave it at that point as it was coming to the end of the London session. But that's AU. Yeah, there's a couple of nice sell opportunities, but no tag on either of them for me. And then I'll just run through AU as well. So AU on the daily, bullish overall. There's the break structure, strong low, weak high, and then we come into sort of extreme demand. Then following FOMC, we sort of had this daily bullish chalk as well. So now the internal and the swing and the week on the daily are both aligned. So longs definitely make more than enough sense. Could maybe pull back into one of these 2 fresh demand zones before we sort of get the leg up the upside. But yeah, that's the daily. 4 hour, had a bearish chalk this morning, but it didn't really react on it, and it just sort of reacted to this imbalance, which I don't pay much attention to at all. But that was the bearish chalk there. You can see this candle just took the high, sitting that there behind the inside bar is your chalk. So yeah, I was thinking that maybe following that there, even though it was in sort of no man's land, I was thinking we could maybe pull back into the previous 4 hour range and sort of mitigate one of these demand zones before we sort of get the next leg to the upside. So yeah, I was happy to look for sells or buys there, essentially on the M15. M15, I used a bit of discretion. Well, not discretion, it meets the criteria, but with this pullback here, it was, I think, almost 40 pips. Yeah, it's 45 pips. So you could use a bit of discretion and say it's not that significant a pullback, but personally, sort of following the 4 hour chalk and this sort of sweep liquidity, I was sort of happy to count that as my swing low, sort of thinking that we may get the pull back down to here. But if you want to sort of use a bit of discretion and keep this here as your swing low and this here as your swing high, then I wouldn't have a big problem with that. At the start of the session, we sort of come into this demand that caused the most recent boss. We had an M15 chalk, but it was only a wick break, so it wasn't the most convincing. So I was looking to see sort of within this newly created demand on the M1 if we got any entries, but price just completely tanked down through it, so there was nothing there. Yes, then following this here, we came out, the reaction to the demand sort of failed, and then we sort of pushed down further into it again. Buys are valid there. There was just nothing that I didn't madly love any of the entry models that set up, so go through some of them here. There was some potential ones in here, like you had the chalk there, so yeah, you could have entered there. A bit of inducement in front of it and all, but just I wasn't sort of, when price starts sort of trickling up like that, it's sort of, I'm slightly more reluctant to enter. I sort of try to stick to the cleanest entry models possible these days. And then again, you could argue that there was a potential entry there after it sort of took out this high, but again, it didn't really sweep. You could argue everything below was mitigated, but there could have been something within the seconds down here, so I didn't really fancy entering that there as it didn't sweep. And then obviously just pushed up and then smashed the low again. At this point here, you could argue again, right, there's another chalk, but we had the M15 boss at this stage, so at this point I was sort of looking at maybe seeing if we would pull back into supply, and then I'll sort of look for sells. But yeah, there was nothing there massively clean in my opinion, nothing that I would really be in a mad rush to risk my capital on. But yeah, you can see now sort of after the boss we've pulled back into this supply, so it'll be interesting to see, maybe we continue bearish and then might sort of come into this demand, maybe mitigate more down towards the 4 hour zone. But yeah, that's EU and AU. Didn't manage to get involved in any of the EU sales unfortunately, and yeah, AU, there's nothing really clean enough that I'd want to risk my capital on personally. So that's it guys, that's EU and AU. If you have any questions around, just give me a shout in the Discord and I will get back to you. Thanks guys.